I chose to illustrate the characteristics of a helpful recommendation a little differently after looking at all of the great examples that have been posted so far. After much deliberation back and forth, I finally decided to put together a video screencast for all of the auditory learners in the class. As we review courses, it is important to keep in mind that students generally learn in multiple ways. We have the tactile or kinesthetic learners who respond to real-life situations or objects they are able to touch and feel. The visual learners who use their eyes to retain information, and the audio learners who function best when information is presented in a spoken format. This illustration combines the visual and audio learning styles. Welcome to my interpretation of the characteristics of a helpful QM recommendation. As my example in this exercise, I will be using Standard 1.8, which reads, "Students are asked to introduce themselves to the class," to offer a little variety. If we were supposed to use Standard 1.1, I apologize for not reading the directions more carefully. There are 5 characteristics of a helpful recommendation. It must be constructive, specific, sensitive, and balanced. As a QM course reviewer, you have an important role to fill. As a team, it is your responsibility to ensure the course is structured around the QM standards and a process for continual improvement is in place. To expand on this, let's look at each characteristic individually. The first characteristic is to be constructive. If you identify something that is unclear or needs to be revisited, provide an example of a solution. In this case, I suggested that it may be very helpful to provide students with a few prompt questions to help them organize their thoughts. The second characteristic is specific. When you make a recommendation, generalities are not helpful. Be specific. In this example, I asked them to consider posting a few discussion prompts and answering the questions themselves as the instructor in their own introduction to begin to develop an online learning community. The third characteristic is measurable. Think in terms of Bloom's action verbs when making recommendations. How will instructors know or be able to demonstrate or measure when a recommendation has been implemented successfully? Going back to my prior recommendations, I asked them to consider posting a few discussion prompts. And I became more specific here with what has been your greatest accomplishment, what is your favorite vacation destination and why, what is one thing most people do not know about you. This will all help to measure if they answer the questions, and secondly, again, provide that online learning community with some congeniality and an opportunity to get to know each other a little better. The fourth characteristic is sensitive. Always keep recommendations and comments positive. The goal is to encourage improvement, not to discourage it. Again, I asked them to answer the questions themselves as instructors in their own introductions to begin to develop an online learning community. The fifth and final characteristic is balanced. Every weakness you find, there will also be strengths that could be acknowledged. In this example, I acknowledge that the student introduction discussion forum is clearly identified. Coming full circle, we are charged with 3 things. The first is as we look at the course to search for the standards and to be objective. The second is to think. Remember, it's not how we would develop a course. We are looking at a course someone else has developed. The third task is to recommend. We are trying to recommend continual improvements, which is our goal. Thank you for listening to my interpretation of this particular assignment.